Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Whitepod. My name is Harshit, and I'm the Director of Business Alliances at White Labs. We are a digital agency specializing in SaaS and e-commerce SEO. And I've got Aurobindo Mukherjee with me today. He's the head of enterprise demand gen at Cvent. And Cvent is a global market-leading meetings, events, and hospitality technology provider. So, big welcome to you, Aurobindo. I'm so happy to have you with me today.
Thanks for having me, Harshit. Looking forward to this.
Brilliant, buddy. Can you please provide a brief overview of your role as head of enterprise demand gen at Cvent?
Absolutely. Like you said, I'm heading the demand generation team for all enterprise accounts at Cvent. Part of this role is oversee. I'm so sorry. I oversee a team dedicated to driving high quality leads, nurture prospect journeys, all within the enterprise segment. And a lot of the stuff we do is around strategy and planning and data driven decision making. And we try to do some innovative stuff here and there. And at the end of the day, we aim to generate demand as the role dictates. And of course, accelerate revenue at the end of the day for CVET. It's a role that allows me to collaborate with numerous cross functional teams, identify new market opportunities, and ultimately deliver a lot of innovative and creative campaigns to tailoring to unique needs of various enterprises.
That's brilliant. And what led you to your current position, and what has been your journey in the demand gen field altogether?
As a bit of a cliche, I am an engineer turned MBA.
Yeah.
And post my MBA, I joined the engineering services marketing team over at HCL. Spent a long time there, over 8 years. And my role there was pretty wide in the sense that it was a business marketing role. Demand gen was obviously one of the things that I did. But apart from demand gen, I was doing content, I was doing digital, I was doing events. So pretty much everything that was related to outbound customer communications fell under my purview. So that's where I honed my demand generation skills. And post HCL, I spent a bit of time over at Learning. And then that eventually brought me to my current role here at Cvent, leading the enterprise demand gen team.
Okay. Where did you do MBA from?
So my MBA was from Faculty of Management Studies over at Delhi University.
Yeah, that's a great college to be in. Right. Let's talk Cvent more. I would love to understand what are the main channels that you're leveraging for your demand gen activities.
Right. In short, as outbound channels, we use email, we use paid social, and we combine that with more physical channels such as roundtables, both in person and virtual, product seminars, and we do a bit of content syndication here and there. And in terms of inbound, website is, of course, our biggest source of leads.
Gotcha. Okay, I would love to understand. Let's talk about some of the winning channels, main channels, and how exactly do you approach each channel strategically? You can pick your favorite channel here, and how exactly do you strategically try to maximize the results and engagement through it?
Right. Without going into in depth, we could be sitting here talking through the night, but every channel has its own nuances in terms, let's say, email. We have a very extensive database that we use to send emails to our target personas. Now, the risk there being if we send too many emails too frequently to a common domain, then we risk being blacklisted by that domain. Whereas that issue isn't there on digital. So we can continue to show any kind of ad at, of course, a certain cost, but we simply do not risk being blacklisted. But then the issue becomes, am I targeting the exact personas that I'm able to do on email? And are my key personas even on social media? There's really no way to find out. So there are pros and cons and nuances, like I said, to each and every channel, and that's what we try and work our way around. Now, these outbound channels may not give us they give us the bulk of our leads in terms of numbers. Not all of them are very high quality leads, so that's another challenge. And that in turn can be solved by more in-person stuff, such as roundtables, which give us very high quality leads, but leads which are extremely low in number. So at the end of the day, it has to be a combination of all of this.
Yeah, makes sense. All right. And you have recently started experimenting with account-based marketing as well. Would love to understand like what basically promoted this move and what are your goals that you're basically aiming to achieve through ABM?
let's say, let me try and structure this because this could be a slightly longish answer. What prompted this? Initially, this came from sales, wherein sales came to us and gave us a list of this is our top certain number of accounts, enterprise accounts. What can you do for these? And that was a huge list in 3 digits. So we were like, I mean, we can do stuff. We're already doing a lot of stuff. But if you're, and they wanted it highly customized. So we were like, it doesn't work that way, unfortunately. We simply do not have the resources to do 1:1 for such a huge number of accounts. We sent the ball back in their court, asked them to give us a more concise list, a more targeted list. And we were able to, after a couple of iterations, bring them down to about 10 accounts.
Mhm.
So that was a small win in itself, getting sales to agree to trim down their focus account list. Now, once we had this list in place, that's when the real fun began. So we picked 2 accounts, and I'll get to what happened because of the accounts that we picked. So we picked 2 accounts right at the top of the funnel. No engagement. Maybe they weren't even aware of Cvent per se. And in one of the accounts, our account managers had actually been given the cold shoulder. So it was slightly brave of us to pick these 2 accounts, but nevertheless, in our excitement, we're doing something new. We went for these. Now, the first step itself was trying to bring about a change in thought process. So from working, so we have a huge shared services team, and generally we work with them in a waterfall kind of model, and that simply wouldn't work if we wanted to kick our account-based marketing program off the ground. So the first step was to move to a more agile model
Mhm.
so that things could move faster. And account-based marketing at 1:1 level is all about customization, right? So in order to do that, there's no way this was happening through a waterfall model. Planning for 30, 60, 90 days, we were never going to get anything off the ground.
Yeah.
So, like I said, first step, move to an agile methodology. And then the steps that followed were pretty much standard ABM stuff. We went to the account manager, had a very extensive discussion on what was the account situation like, what were the challenges that the account manager was facing, was there any kind of communication that had happened, like I mentioned, that one account wherein they had been given complete cold shoulder by the head of events.
Yeah.
And just took their opinion on what the account was like, why the account was part of this list. So did they actually see a very high growth potential in this account?
Yeah.
And so once we had all of that information on board, that took at least 2 to 3 brainstorming workshops with these guys. We then went to work with our research team
Okay.
to find out everything we could about that account that was relevant to us, right from what they did, what was their major source of income or revenue, how were events playing a role in generating that revenue for them, right down to who were the key personas or key decision makers over there at these accounts, who would be our main target audience for this whole program.
Yeah.
Once we had, and of course, looking at if we could get what was their marketing tech stack like. Could we have a situation wherein Cvent fit perfectly into their marketing tech stack? So once we had, and this was a huge exercise that we had research do for us. It was not something that they had done to this extent. This took the first time we did it, this took almost a month to do. And after we had this in place, that's when we finally got together, my team got together and tried to chart out what is it that exactly we're going to do with these guys.
Mhm.
So we even spoke with the product marketing, tried to understand their point of view, tried to do a lot of product mapping with the account overall, with the various personas or key decision makers and influencers that we had identified. And then I'm a big believer in positioning. So any marketing student would know the value of branding and positioning. The number one thing that I did was to create a positioning statement. Not so Cvent obviously has a positioning statement out in the market, right? But what would be our positioning with respect to this specific account? Could we tailor something very specific to their needs, whereas still keeping the overall Cvent positioning, which is any event, every event, Cvent's got you covered, in mind, and having something as a subset of that. So once we had that in place, like I said, we went to work on mapping different products and solutions against their challenges. mapping products and solutions at the level of the various decision makers and influencers, and then putting together content journeys. So if, for example, for their head of events, we were proposing something like strategic meetings management. So our nurture went, or our journey went something like, if they showed interest, if that person showed interest in strategic meeting management, then continue to show them more stuff around that. Or if it didn't, then let's move on to the next topic and the next topic, and so on and so forth. So those are the kind of extensive journeys that we put together on both email as well as digital.
Okay.
And then once we had this sort of plan in mind, we then went back to sales to get their opinion. Is there something that's in line with your expectations? Is there something that you feel you don't want to do? Is there something that you feel we're missing out on, we should be doing? And after that, it was more execution level stuff. We put together an entire content calendar, channel wise, in place. That was at least 8 to 10 weeks in the beginning. And then we continued to extend it as we went along. And we were, in terms of tracking, of course, any marketing campaign, the key end goal or metric is to track whatever you're doing, right? So we were a little overzealous to begin with. We were tracking it every day, but eventually we settled down to tracking whatever we were doing weekly and bi-weekly, and looking for any sort of intent signal from these guys. Now, generally, tracking intent signals is a big task at scale when you're doing one is to all or even one is to many. But for one is to one, since we had an agile process in place, we were tracking everything manually. So we were able to do this at the frequency we were doing. Uh, like I said, and this particular person that I spoke about, the head of events, I remember an email from that person's side to our account manager actually read, currently we do not outsource our events to an agency. Please do not reach out to me. That statement told so much about,
They're not aware about your offerings and stuff. Yeah.
exactly, not just our offerings, but not aware of the category in general, right? They thought of Cvent or any event management platform in general as an agency. So they weren't even aware that such a product exists in the market. So the first level of communication or messaging from us was trying to educate them on what is event management software and how it can help them overcome the pain points that they might have in organizing events.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of, for lack of a better term, stalking involved. Their social media accounts, what are they interested in, whether it was personally, professionally, LinkedIn and Facebook and so on and so forth. By the end of it, we could tell you what her dog's name was and where she was 8 years ago and what were her hobbies. So those are the depths we went to into researching about these guys and just trying to get an in for our sales teams, whatever way we could.
Any specific tools do you use to do this, or is it like all manual on your
Yeah.
end?
So that's a great question, Harshit. So at the beginning, a lot of this was done manually. Our research team uses a few tools in terms of enrichment and so on, especially with respect to getting information about their marketing tech stacks. But at our end, at demand gen level, a lot of this stuff was being done manually. Of course, we have our email automation softwares, and then paid social media is fairly automated. But essentially, we were managing everything manually. So that's how we did it for these two accounts, and we had varying degrees of success. We eventually managed to get meetings and demos with both these accounts. There are ongoing conversations still with one of them. So we actually have an open opportunity with one. And unfortunately, the other one told us that they simply aren't looking to outsource at this point in time. So we paused our communication with the aim of maybe getting back at them in 6 months' time, if considering we had done pretty much everything we could to convince them. Now, so you mentioned about tools, right? So this is about 6 months into the program. We've done 2 accounts. Now, the next obvious step was, how can we scale this? Right. So from accounts in 3 digits to down to top 10 accounts, sales had quite a few expectations, and we were just at 2 accounts 6 months into the program. There was a slight change in strategy from our side. rather than going after completely cold accounts,
Mhm.
can we look at accounts which are more bottom of the funnel, where there is knowledge of not just event management platforms, but knowledge of Cvent, and there is clear intent. Can we push these more middle to bottom of the funnel accounts towards taking demos, towards having meetings with our sales teams, and eventually converting? Pick the low hanging fruits. What we did was, we not only the top 10, but we extended the exercise to a lot more accounts. And we manually created an account scoring model, taking into account a numerous number of tactics, assigning different weights to them.
Mhm.
And this whole activity in itself took weeks in getting the exact data in place, and then fine tuning the scoring model that we were going to use, running this by various stakeholders. And we finally put together, on our own, an account scoring model that told us which focus accounts from sales were actually at this stage where we would classify them as middle or bottom. And after doing all this effort, this is the interesting bit. After we did this effort, we identified these accounts, is when we actually got an account based marketing tool onboarded. So that was a conversation that had been going for quite some time. And call it coincidence, call it bad or good timing. That was when we got this tool in place, which is, of course, 6sense. And it made the entire exercise of that account scoring model completely redundant, because that's exactly what the tool is supposed to do: tell us which accounts are in which stage of the buyer funnel. So that's where we are at currently.
Oh, that's brilliant. I would love to understand, because your paid social is again one of the biggest channel that you are leveraging. I would like to understand, especially from your enterprise demand generation point of view, what are the core challenges and some of the giveaways that you have for the fellow marketers?
So challenges in terms of digital, I already spoke about the challenges we face in terms of the availability of people on social media, but that's simply out of your control. If they are there, they're there. If they're not there, then there's nothing you can do about it. But beyond that, there are issues with GDPR, although that's more for email, but even for digital, at times it can be an issue. There's now the whole California Act that's in place. There are issues with third party data and first party data and so on and so forth that we can or cannot use. So that is there. And then, especially from an enterprise point of view, there is this challenge about using tools beyond LinkedIn. Now, LinkedIn is obviously the most obvious tool to use when you are talking about a B2B audience. But again, if these guys are not present on LinkedIn, then you have to look to go beyond LinkedIn and look at other types of social media, whether it's the various gamut of platforms that Facebook has, whether it's the erstwhile Twitter or something else.
I think
Right.
Twitter makes better sense than Facebook, I believe, right?
Yes, ideally speaking, and personally, I do feel it does. I am a very avid user of Twitter myself. But somehow we just don't find enough people there. The number of so-called active users on Twitter just doesn't fulfill our criteria of scalable campaigns. Somehow it's still, the numbers are there with Facebook and Instagram and so on and so forth. But the biggest challenge with these social media, these personalized or consumer-centric social media platforms, is availability of enterprise data, which is simply not there. Can we get creative? Can we use cookie-based data? Can we do read? Can we do UTM-based targeting? Can we use third-party databases to map out our database onto Facebook? Can we get the corporate email? Right now, nobody uses their corporate email ID for a social media account, even if it is on LinkedIn, let alone Facebook,
For sure.
right? So our database contains corporate email IDs. Can they be somehow mapped to personal email IDs that would allow us access to similar enterprise audiences on Facebook and Instagram? These are the various challenges that we face and how we try to overcome them. Of course, nothing is perfect, but again, for us, it's a numbers game, and of course, quality of those numbers. But if you can keep the numbers coming in, then considering a certain level of quality, that will certainly continue to benefit us. from a pipeline and top line perspective.
No, makes sense. Can you walk us through basically the process of funnel mapping that you follow, and how basically it aligns with your demand generation efforts?
Great question, Harshit. So that's actually what I was hired to do in the first place.
Yep.
And even before I took on this account-based marketing project, the funnel-based mapping, as you called it, was you know the initial big project, as it were, that I took on. So again, just setting some context. Before I came on, there was no structure in place with respect to mass campaigns, right? There was a lot of ad hoc stuff that was going on. And of course, I'm not saying it wasn't successful. See, it's been very successful over the years before I joined, in whether it's the enterprise or mid market segment. But essentially, there was a lack of structure. Campaigns were a little ad hoc in nature. Sales used to come and put together a request, and the corresponding campaign used to be run. But there was no talk of a prospect journey, as it were, through the various stages of the funnel. So, can we treat any marketer would understand the logic, right? Can we treat prospects at different stages of the funnel differently, right? Whether it's in terms of the types of assets you send them, whether it's the type of messaging you send them, and whether it's the type of whether you're sending them product related information or thought leadership information. So all of that needs to change basis where the prospect is at his stage of the journey through the funnel. Again, this was a huge exercise from a database point of view. We have, in terms of a TAM on the enterprise side, we have, in terms of just parent accounts, I'm talking about, it goes into the thousands. And then if you talk about subsidiaries of these parent accounts or parent logos, as we call them, that goes further into the thousands and almost into the hundreds of thousands.
What
So
exactly are you using for your data management?
in terms of databases, we have again a whole host of databases. We're using Athena as our overall marketing database. And then we have Salesforce, of course, for sales. And then that syncs up into Marketo, which we're using for as our marketing automation.
Gotcha.
So then, yeah, coming back to the funnel strategy. So the first step was to identify how many accounts are at which stage of the funnel. If we just have 5 accounts at a certain stage, then that's simply not enough numbers to focus on that stage. Can we just merge that stage with a different stage? And once again, there was no tool. We didn't have our sixth sense in place at the time when I was doing this. Right. So again, the whole account based funnel was created manually by us. So right from top of the funnel to middle of the funnel to accounts that were right at the bottom of the funnel, we used to call them red accounts at the time. We created that entire funnel at an account level on our own, looking at our database. And the definitions were very binary to begin with. So, for example, if we have an MQL, even if we have one MQL, we are calling that account as a red account. If we have 0 MQLs, we're calling that account as a blue account. And then further segmentations inside red and blue. So if there are SQLs present, we are calling that a very warm or hot account. Whereas without SQLs, but there are MQLs, we're calling that sort of a warm account or lukewarm, whatever the terminology was at that time. So that's the extent to which we went in defining the funnel. Now, once we had the funnel in place, then like I said, what are the assets, what's the messaging that's going to go to all of these prospects? And this was done from an email point of view at prospect level, not at account level. So at any stage, a single account could have prospects that was spread across the funnel. Now, you could have one person who's a junior event planner at an enterprise account, who's well aware of Cvent, who's actually engaging with our content, and could be at a state where they're ready to take a demo from us. They're so interested in event management. Whereas their head of events, who's the ultimate decision maker, is not even aware of Cvent or not even aware of event management, like we saw in our account-based marketing scenario. So they're right at the top of the funnel. So every account will have people that are at different stages of the funnel, and we needed to treat them differently. Right. And after that, it was a case of setting up nurtures both on email and on digital. Now, digital Of course, setting up nurtures is much more complicated because you simply don't have personal information. So we had to do it at account level. And then once we had these complicated nurtures in place, how would prospect flow from one stage to the next? That was complicated in itself. What type of assets are we going to send at each stage? What exactly is our demo offering going to be at the bottom of the funnel? Are we going to have different types of segmentations and lanes at each stage? Can we, so just to add further complexity, can we have vertical based lanes? Can we further segment our verticals into persona based? So if I have to really drill down, a prospect in the middle of the funnel, can we treat someone who belongs to, let's say, the manufacturing industry and is an event planner differently from, let's say, a marketer who belongs to the financial services industry entirely differently,
Yeah.
just for the middle of the funnel? And similar segments apply to all stages. So
Yeah.
those are, that is, I'm not saying we did it at every stage, but that is the level to which we define the structure. And then, of course, again, we studied the data. Did it make sense to complicate things that much? Would each and every segment and lane have enough data to justify that level of complication? And that's how we went about creating this and getting everybody on board with such a large program. Nothing like this had been done before at Cvent. So once again, getting shared services on board, getting on-site or onshore stakeholders on board with this, because it meant scrapping a few programs in a few places, replacing a few programs in a few places. And that was obviously going to ruffle a few feathers. But that's what bringing a new structure entails essentially. Sorry.
Yeah, makes sense. And did you also, Aurobindo, focus on the post-purchase funnel activities as well, or was it like part of it?
Yeah, it's a really good question again, Harshit. To be honest, and this is a big consideration when we're doing 1:1 ABM as well, the ticket sizes for Cvent are much smaller. It's a numbers game for us, like I said. The ticket sizes are much smaller when you compare to a larger billion-dollar organization. Yeah. So, like I was saying, this was a question that we pondered upon even for 1:1. Ticket sizes at Cvent are much smaller when you compare to a very large organization, let's say a multi-billion-dollar organization. And for that reason, we're always trying to evaluate, does it make sense to go down to, that level, whether it's doing 1:1 ABM or whether it's getting into a post-purchase, sorry, not post-purchase, but you mentioned purchase, right?
Yeah.
So
No,
yeah,
post-purchase, if you want to increase or just introduce few more
my
offerings.
bad. Yeah, sorry, I got the question wrong. In terms of post-purchase, there is actually a separate team that does what we call customer demand gen, which takes on the role of upselling and cross-selling and so on and so forth. And then there is a separate team that's just in charge of customer programs. So no selling per se, but just customer advocacy programs and so on and so forth. So there are actually two separate teams that are dedicated, and they have very detailed programs and nurtures in place in order to do that with very specific cool-off period and taking care of at-risk accounts. And then where in the renewal cycle is it ideal to start reaching out to accounts to ensure that they renew with us? Just to answer your question, there are separate teams. It doesn't entirely fall under my purview. But yes, that is something that SEO and marketing does do.
And I'm going to be a little biased over here because SEO is our core forte. Is SEO helping you with your, demand gen strategies and those activities?
Absolutely. Absolutely, it is. Once again, I have to be very transparent and say that SEO doesn't fall directly under my purview. However, having said that, I mentioned already a significant chunk of our leads does come through the website, and SEO drives a significant number of those significant leads to the website. I can't stress enough on about the role that SEO plays in getting us a big percentage of all our overall leads. And of course, the quality is right there. So yeah, and just when on the topic of SEO and inbound, that's something that we've been trying to do recently. I talked about the whole prospect journey framework that we put together. So recently, we've been trying to identify what is rather than forcing or putting together this entire journey and scripting it, can we identify what is the organic journey that a prospect might take before eventually coming onto our website and booking a meeting or demo with us, can we identify that journey? So this is again a very extensive exercise, as you can imagine, going into details about web visitors. Majority of them are unknown. Can we work out some trends from there? Can we work out some patterns? Which channel did they come from? Can we use UTMs to identify that? So the complexities in this whole exercise are endless.
And to be honest, the scale at which Cvent website has, I think organic alone, you're close to 1 million visits per month. So doing that and then mapping again is a mammoth of task for sure.
Yeah, it's a nightmare. It's something that's still ongoing. We haven't actually managed to nail down an exact pattern or an exact journey that a good number of our prospects take before they book a demo, but we're still at it, and hopefully we'll find something that we can then push to all our prospects.
Okay. Aurobindo, tell me one more thing. Just curious to know that how exactly you keep track of your competitors' activities, especially like in your domain. How exactly does that happen?
Okay, so very interesting question again, Harshit. And I don't want to sound arrogant or condescending, but competitors are something that we actually don't worry about too much at Cvent. Now, I'm not saying we don't do anything, but Cvent is at that stage and at that scale wherein we are larger than our next 10 competitors combined. In terms of sheer numbers, we, like I said, we don't worry about our competitors too much. In fact, I remember this discussion at a recent all hands, wherein this was asked that in 5 years' time, who do you see being our biggest competitor in the market? And the not unanimous, but the most common answer that we got was maybe that competitor doesn't even exist today. For example, when we went into the pandemic and in-person events completely vanished and everything went virtual, Cvent's virtual offering wasn't great, and it took us a few months. Of course, I wasn't on board at the time, but it took Cvent a few months to come up with a virtual offering. And new players on the market who were offering virtual platforms and virtual offerings got significant amount of funding and ended up with significant amount of top line at the time. Now that's a different story that now that in-person is back, now they're having a really hard time, which is why we still comfortably dominate the market. But again, coming back to your question, we do have a competitor research team separately, which does competitor research for us, tells us what our competitors are doing from a sales perspective, from a marketing perspective, what are the various updates, if any, in case we've had so many cases with so many layoffs, they overhired during the pandemic. That's not just limited to the events industry, that's limited to tech overall. But especially so in the tech industry, wherein virtual was booming at that time. And now it's completely back to in-person almost.
Now, Oro, tell me one more thing. Like with respect to the main KPIs for your demand gen, what all are you basically tracking and like part of your reporting basically?
Yeah. So very straightforward, Harshit. Number of MQLs, number of SQLs, what is the MQL to SQL conversion, and what is the marketing attributed booking. The last one being the most important for obvious reasons.
Okay. And coming to my very last question, like very last serious question, what advice would you give to the fellow marketers looking to enhance their demand gen strategies, especially in your own space, like B2B space altogether?
Just go back to basics. Understand your target audience and understand their pain points before you do anything at all. I think until you empathize with your audience, a lot of the stuff that you'll be doing will be, I hate to use the term, but spray and pray, right? So invest time in research, invest time in how you can segment the audience. There's something called the bowling pin strategy, if you're aware. So rather than targeting the entire TAM at one point, can you target small niche segments and take them on one at a time? And that will then allow you to conquer bigger set segments as you go along. Just bowling and pins, right? A bowling ball and pins. And the other, after you've done your research, after you've done segmentation, tailor your messaging. Hyper personalize your messaging as much as you can, and map your solutions and your products to the pain points. that you identified.
Gotcha. And since you mentioned hyper personalization is a very interesting time, especially a lot of people do it on email marketing, and you're doing it at scale. Like your email marketing audience size is huge. Are you doing personal hyper personalization specifically to your email campaigns, or that's not something scalable at the moment?
So that's a really good question, Harshit. I think just an hour ago, I got off a call where we are trying to do the exact same thing. So, I mean, I mentioned, right, for 1:1, we were doing personalization, at the point where we just couldn't personalize anymore. We were targeting exact individuals with, messaging tailored to their hobbies. I remember, sorry, I'm going off topic. There was a person who was a big Star Wars fan in one of the accounts. We actually tailored our emails to that person in a way that Master Yoda would have written them. If you've seen Star Wars, changing the active to the passive. I wrote those emails myself. And so that's the level of personalization you can go to when you're doing 1:1. Now, when you're doing it at scale, that's a whole different ball game altogether. So once again, go back to the basics. Can you segment? Can you create niches somewhere? And then can you identify data points in order to use for the segments? Of course, there'll be a lot of tools involved and a lot of dynamic fields involved possibly in accessing data, whether you're accessing it offline or you're accessing it in an automated manner through the system. But if the systems are in place, or even if they aren't, it's something that definitely can be done. It's just a matter of setting your mind to it and saying that personalization is the way to go.
Yeah. And we're still trying to do a bundling in a sense with the dynamic fields and trying to scale it up.
Yep. Yep.
All right, let's have a quick rapid fire. We're coming to an end and let's do that. Okay, let's make it a bit fun session. Okay. Okay. What habit holds you back the most?
I don't want to sound very pedantic, but I think between overthinking and between perfection, we all talk about 80 is the new 100. If it's there to a certain limit, then just go for it. But yes, especially with the AVM program we ran, we are trying to perfect everything. And at some point, you just have to run.
Makes sense. What's your biggest distraction?
Biggest distraction, my phone.
Okay. What chore do you absolutely despise doing?
What chore do I despise doing? Cooking?
Yeah. Okay. What subject do you find to be most fascinating?
What subject? Interesting. We're on a marketing podcast, so I should say marketing, but back in school, it was maths.
Okay. And what career did you dream of having as a kid?
I am still a big sports buff. Either playing cricket or football was a childhood fantasy, but pretty happy where I am right now.
Okay, now coming to a very last question. What did you last search on Google?
What a last search on Google. I'll have to check my search history, but I guess something work related, possibly something to do. We just discussed this, right? Something to do with how we can. There's a new exercise that we're doing around personalizing content, right?
Okay.
So how can we? I'm sorry, I'm giving a very boring answer, but how can we personalize content and how can we do that at scale in our CRM, or how can we tag content specifically? So which prospect consume which type of content, and then can we cater the journey
So
after
when you
that?
say consumption, like on your website,
Yeah, exactly. So what Cvent content that they consume, and can we then feed them similar content? So I was just
I
searching.
think there are a lot of tools out there where you can like just if you've done the mapping right, you can still go ahead and have that personalized effect. A lot of companies have been doing it successfully. So yeah, maybe when we meet next, do share the results.
Sorry for the boring answer, but
Interesting for the marketers, so that's the audience. So makes sense. Thank you so much, Arvind. I really enjoyed this session, and thank you for sharing your experiences, your wisdom, and yeah, love the chat. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
same and Harshit, thank you for having me, and let's speak soon. And hope for everyone listening, I was able to help them out in some way or the other.